From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
In June of 1969, 21-year-old Norma McCorvey discovered she was pregnant with her third child, which she was not prepared to have. However, she was living in Texas, a state with some of the strictest abortion laws in the country. While trying to find a way to rid herself of her baby, either through illegal abortion or adoption, she was referred by her adoption attorney to lawyers Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey. In 1970, Weddington and Coffey filed suit in a U.S. District Court in Texas on behalf of McCorvey under the alias Jane Roe. The defendant in the case was Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade, who represented the state of Texas. The case eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court and was decided in favor of Roe on January 22, 1973, legalizing abortion in the United States and asserting that a pregnant woman has a fundamental right to obtain an abortion. Due to its controversial nature, the decision made in Roe v. Wade was a major turning point in the socio-political atmosphere of the United States through the development of an abortion debate, igniting culture war. According to tradition carried over from England, abortions performed before the mother felt fetal movement in the uterus, known as quickening, was not a crime. In 1821, Connecticut adopted the first law banning abortion before quickening, and soon after, abortions became largely illegal nationwide. On April 25, 1967, the governor of Colorado, John Love, signed the first liberalized abortion law in the United States, and by the end of 1972, a total of 13 states had similar laws. There were even Southern Baptist leaders converting in favor of abortion rights. For instance, Dr. W.A. Griswold's pro-choice argument was that life did not begin until a baby took his or her first breath. In the 1960s, both the Democratic and Republican parties held moderate but slightly pro-life views on abortion. However, as the abortion debate and the women's rights movement gained strength, the electorate's opinion began to polarize. Between 1960 and 1972, even as public support for decriminalization was continuing to grow, a political conflict over abortion began, with the Catholic Church predominantly leading opposition to abortion decriminalization. Even as Catholics were working to build institutions and arguments against abortion, abortion's very identification as a Catholic voting issue made of interest to strategists for both political parties during the 1972 presidential campaign. Abortion was beginning to find a place in national party politics. On January 22, 1973, the United States Supreme Court issued its ruling in Roe v. Wade, which found that the constitutional right to privacy was broad enough to encompass abortion rights.
The values that we hold are not absolute. They are always contingent. They conflict. And life is made up of decisions in complicated situations in cases of conflicting values. If you listen to just one in isolation, yeah, it may sound legitimate and maybe is, but you have to ask what it means under particular conditions.
The decision made in Roe v. Wade divided the nation into two distinct segments, pro-life and pro-choice. The public's division over abortion stems from conflicting views on personal freedom. The view that abortion should be illegal generally rests on the claim that the existence and moral right to life of human beings begins at conception. The pro-choice view on abortion generally rests on the claim that women have a right to control what happens in and to their own bodies, and that abortion is just an exercise of this right. These factors, in combination, result in broad definitions for the terms pro-life and pro-choice that account for the large middle ground present in American opinions on abortion. Although 53% of Americans identify themselves as pro-choice, only 40% of the population supports abortion for any reason during the first trimester of pregnancy. Furthermore, 53% of Americans feel that abortion is morally wrong. The overlap between these two groups implies that many Americans encompass both sides of the argument, morally objecting to the notion of abortion, yet recognizing the idea of an individual's right to choose. Due to extreme fanaticism and social protest over the abortion issue, violent incidents directed against abortion providers, from the murders and attempted murders of physicians and clinic staff, to the arson and bombing of abortion clinics have occurred many times in the past 40 years. The Supreme Court generally supported states' efforts to protect the clinics and those working in or attending them through the use of buffer zones and other means, but the fact that this kind of violence occurred indicates the hard opposition to abortion held by some Americans, especially those willing to commit a crime to prevent what they consider to be a crime: the abortion of an unborn child. Since Roe was an extremely controversial decision, it provided grounds for continued social and political dialogue. Following the decision, both major political parties formalized their general consensus regarding abortion in their party platforms, with the Democrats becoming pro-choice and the Republicans becoming pro-life. In turn, abortion became a significant wedge issue in American politics, as these attitudes led people to switch parties asymmetrically and ideological identities began to affect partisanship on the abortion issue. The galvanizing issue for conservatives was one of the most divisive and emotional issues of the time: abortion. Opposition to the Roe v. Wade decision brought together a wide array of organizations and individuals. They included large numbers of Catholics, political conservatives, and religious fundamentalists, most of whom regard abortion under virtually any circumstance as tantamount to murder. They were prepared to organize in support of politicians who agreed with their position and against those who disagreed with it. Pro-choice and pro-life demonstrations became a fixture of the political landscape. By the end of the 1970s, a conflict had erupted between actors championing one of the two conceptions of morality: the progressive and the orthodox. Religious and political coalitions had formed around each of these worldviews, bringing together individuals and organizations who would press for cultural and social policy reforms on issues such as abortion. By 1980, with the use of modern fundraising techniques, this new right movement overtook the moderate wing of the Republican Party. This new right played a crucial role in defining the issues of the 1980s, focusing a large part of their platform on social issues and willing to use state power to encourage its traditional view on family values, such as opposition to abortion. The figure who drew the new right movement together was Ronald Reagan, who elucidated the issues focused upon by the new right at the national level. The pro-life movement gained control of the Republican Party's platform committee, adding pro-life planks to the Republican position and calling for a human life amendment to the U.S. Constitution banning abortion. By the early 1980s, the Republicans were laboring under the weight of a single-issue religious test for heresy: abortion. The conservative movement, buoyed by the Reagan era, pressed forward with an agenda of cultural change, which required that moral boundaries be drawn in relation to other groups, as conservatives pursued a deliberate effort to divide the secular and progressive wings of the Democratic coalition from more religious and traditional ones. Three pro-life U.S. presidents, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush, have been elected since the decision, with one of the deciding factors in each election being the moral tumultuary of the abortion issue. Politically, the abortion issue is a question of personal privacy rights. The laws in the books and subsequent court decisions relating to them have, over time, been tied to two questions: whether women have a right to obtain abortions, and at what point does an unborn child have a claim to rights of its own. A recent point of contention arose in the spring of 2012 between Catholic and other religious employers who, on the basis of religious or moral opposition, did not provide health insurance coverage that include contraception or abortion-inducing drugs. The recent healthcare reform bill, nicknamed Obamacare, mandates private employers to provide such coverage. Due to the political differences of the two parties regarding abortion, the issue has played a role in every major election where two members of the competing parties are running against each other. Roe v. Wade greatly affected the United States as it created a stronger political divide between the two parties and insinuated a cultural war between the pro-life and pro-choice groups in America. Unlike other issues in the culture wars, this is one in which both sides regard themselves as civil rights activists, trying to expand the frontiers of freedom. The American public has struggled with a moral divide over abortion for decades. The moral aspect of this issue is what makes it so difficult to resolve. The critical question that fuels this debate is, when does life begin? This issue has inspired marches and murder, and spawned a set of competing interest groups that have raised millions of dollars a year to influence public opinion and create single-issue voters. By dividing the nation, it has set in place a modern culture war between two conflicting groups: those who believe in the right to life, and those who believe in the right to choose.
This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.